Turning to the state of the parties, there's been no big shifts. Support for the Conservatives remains at a historic low, 21%. That's more than 20 points behind the Labour Party. But might the announcements that we've heard this week, might a more fervent approach to devolution, might the levelling up funding that we heard so much about yesterday, might this be able to move the dial? Or, frankly, will the economic headwinds be simply too strong to counteract? Well, let's discuss this in greater detail now. Jonathan Portes is Professor of Economics and Public Policy at King's College London. And Jonathan, first of all, I was fascinated yesterday to look at the resignation of Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand. I was looking at the headlines down in New Zealand, where there is a high inflation, the mortgage rates have shot up, newspapers are talking about a crime wave, and I'm just wondering, is basically every country in the developed world facing the same sort of headwinds?
Well, certainly the cost of living crisis is certainly a European phenomenon and to some extent a global phenomenon, right? What is happening is the result of primarily of higher energy prices and higher food prices post-pandemic, and in part because of the conflict in Ukraine. So there very much is a sort of short-term crisis, which is primarily the result of global factors. But then on top of that, I think what's happening here is this realization that as well as the short-term factors, we've also had something of a lost decade economically, that first austerity and then Brexit have led to this sort of period of prolonged slow growth in the economy, in productivity, in real wages, at the same time as the quality and sustainability of our public services have been eroded. And that has sort of, some of us have been talking about this for some time, but this sort of penny has begun to drop rather more widely. So I think we have a combination of short-term and long-term economic factors, many of which, of course, are global, but some of which have been building up here for quite some time.
The UK economy has underperformed, for example, the US economy. But I think it's less clear as to whether or not the UK economy has underperformed the EU economy, or specifically the Eurozone economy, which had slower growth rates right through up until the pandemic. From 2010 to 2020, the UK economy was much faster than the EU average growth for those developed countries.
It wasn't much faster. Within some sort of margin of error for GDP. What is more apparent, though, is if you look at sort of things which actually matter to households, so real wages, median household incomes, and in particular, the sort of incomes of people at 25% or as a sort of third, fourth, fifth deciles of the income distribution, that's been considerably worse than lots of sort of comparable countries, even when overall GDP growth has been roughly comparable. So you'll have seen those charts showing how we have, although our overall GDP growth has actually been quite similar to France, if you look at sort of median living standards, we performed rather less well. And then, of course, look at what's happening to public services at the same time.